Okay, I've hit live. Loading. And it looks like we are live. Welcome everyone to Aeon Byte Live, episode 19. Welcome to the desert of the real and all that good stuff. We're going to let, as usual, people start to go into the chat room. Tonight, we will be discussing Gnostic and occult themes in Game of Thrones. I know the show ended. I know there was some controversy, but it's still buzzing. We still have the prequels, and we still have that Gnostic deconstruction of powerful cultural forces, and Game of Thrones certainly was one of them. It certainly, I read the books in 1999, and I have read the books since then, followed the show, and I am glad for this content to be created. So with us tonight, we are definitely honored to have a second time. He was a few years ago, he was in an audio version, but now he is on Aeon Byte, and that is Fady Riad. How are you doing, Fady?
Hi, Miguel. How are you? Pleasure to be with you today.
Great to have you on. It truly is. And you are in winter in Australia. And of course, you're proving that Australia exists. And so there's that joke that it doesn't exist. But
yeah, we just hook on our heads down there because in the South Pole.
There you go. There you go. And also with us is my friend and the occult fan. It is Nate. How you doing, Nate?
Hey, Miguel. Hey, Fady. And hi, everyone. Fady, I'm glad we didn't let them know how we had to turn your camera upside down so you could join us from Australia. Don't tell anyone. It's great to see you. Good evening. Winter is coming.
Otherwise, I'll pull upwards.
There you go. There you go. So now we've got some people. Oops, I got to clear my throat. I'm going to put this on pause. There you go. Much better. I have cleared my throat on mute, the beauty of technology. But people are starting to come into the chat room. I will repeat this, but of course, if you have any questions, try to put a lot of question marks on them for Fady on a Game of Thrones, and we will try to get to them. Those who wish to donate through Super Chats, I, of course, truly appreciate it. I could always use the help, and you will be put at the top of the line. Or if you simply want to support this heresy, I can always use the help. It's been an interesting June and July with this Saturn retrograde and this Mercury retrograde and Jupiter retrograde. There's been a lot of news and a lot of ups and downs, but here we are in the desert of the real, and the show must go on. So, and as always, I'm sure as you know, this show is live, but it will be on YouTube right after. And then I'll have the audio version coming out probably in more than a few days. I have, again, some house cleaning. I've got some personal stuff going on. But sometime next week, I will have the audio version out for everybody on iTunes, Spotify, and all those places. And as a bonus, I will put, for members and patrons, I will put Fady's first interview that we did on the Gospel of Lie. Because there you go, the Gospel of Lie, because it is an excellent book. I still get emotional when I think about your book. I have your book, and I think about our interview. Not only is it one of the most bittersweet, poignant stories that I have ever heard, Fady, but it is also an amazing metaphor, allegory, and lesson on the importance of the Christ and Sophia aeon or archetype through history, through our lives, through our imaginations. It's amazing interview, and I'm delighted to be able to show it to people that missed it. And as our audience has grown, they'll get exposed to your book and your work. So I highly recommend you get the Gospel of Lie.
Thank you.
With that said, before I get too far, before I keep talking, so Fady, why don't we start with Game of Thrones? How did you become interested? Was it the books, the show, or what got you interested? Are you a fantasy reader?
Well, I have to admit that I haven't read the books. I've only watched the show, but I don't really like cliffhangers. So I get very emotional when, as the cliffhanger, you have to wait for a whole year to see the next season. So what I did is everybody was talking about Game of Thrones and I wasn't watching. I was waiting. And then when season 8 was out, I watched the whole series. I watched like 3 hours every day of Game of Thrones. That happened like just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm still relatively fresh. And I watch everything, just
Wow.
three episodes every day for 2 or 3 weeks. And I done the whole thing. No cliffhangers for me.
Well, that's pretty intense. I guess that's the way to do it. I'm sure, did it affect your dreams, your real world, and all that? Because it's an intense series at times. It's not
Yes,
your average soap opera.
it was very intense indeed. That's right. But then now that I've watched it, maybe I'll start reading the books. Let's see how what's the difference between the books and the adaptation. Yeah.
It's pretty different, especially at one point in the middle of it. It completely abandons the books, or it's more like it catches up with the books, and there's no books, so they just continue the plot. So,
Yeah.
in many ways, I enjoyed what they did. I know people were angry at the way it ended, but I knew once they decided that they were just going to that was going to come to an end, I knew the pacing was going to take a hit. I was prepared. I knew they would you needed another season to really flesh out the arcs and get things going. So I knew it would be rushed, and I was fine with it. So I personally was pretty pleased with the whole series, all in all, and I'm glad it came out. So what about you, Nate? Did you watch it? Did you read the books? What's your story with Game of Thrones?
I heard about the Song of Ice and Fire. I heard about that a long time ago, back in around 2005, when I got into the Golden Compass series, both of which were presented to me at the same time. When the show came out, I was a little bit late to start, but I think around the 3rd season, I did what Fady did. I binge watched it, and then I kind of started pacing it after that. A few points I was a little disappointed with here and there, but that's the nature of TV, any good art. And I think just to get to the end of it, yeah, a lot of people complain about it. A lot of people really had a violent backlash because obviously there were some of those constraints you talked about, but ultimately, I guess they did a pretty good job. It was, I'm of mixed minds, but yeah, the whole thing ultimately was good, but very archonic at the end, even the way that things wrapped up. We can get into that.
Yes, certainly. I hope we do. And yes, I mean, there are certain shows that have a transcendental episode. For example, Twin Peaks season 3, episode 8. There's the Westworld episode with the Ghost Nation. And for me, as some people have said already in the chat room, it was I think episode 3, The Long Night. I think that was one of the most amazing, visually, emotionally, and enigmatic episodes I've ever seen. The acting, the music, it was really amazing. So it was hard to top. After that, it was like, well, you just defeat all these spiritual beings, and now humans got to get back to politics and their mundane stuff. So, but all in all, it was good, and so forth. So, Fady, you gave me quite a bit of notes, and I need to pull them out here for your brief watching of Game of Thrones. So I am pulling them up here. When did you, what was some of the first things that you noticed about the show that really struck out to you?
Well, I cheated, so I opened the Wikipedia article talking about George R.R. Martin, and I discovered that he was an atheist.
Oh.
And that does make sense. There will be some hints to his atheism scattered in the show. I have a quotation from him here. He's saying that I supposed I'm a lapsed Catholic. He would consider me an atheist or agnostic. I find religion and spirituality fascinating. I would like to believe this isn't the end and there is something more, but I can't convince the rational part of me that makes any sense whatsoever. And unquote, that's at the end of his quotation. So he's not a believer. And at certain points, he models some religions in his mythos after Christianity or after certain movements of Christianity. And that becomes quite evident later on in the show. I've also noticed that season 8 was not very well received, and I've watched quite a few alternate endings, and yeah, I've got some notes that we might discuss later about the ending of season 8, how it could have been pulled off in a better way.
Sure. Yeah, we can certainly loop back to that. So, and of course, when you're building fantasy worlds, I've written fantasy novels. What you're going to do is sort of get very syncretic. You're going to start throwing different religions to match these cultures, and there's the usual tropes. The dark-skinned Arabs coming from the south, and then the white-skinned sort of Russian Scandinavians coming from the north, and the Europeans in the middle, and you try to throw all these gods with them. But all in all, what do you see as the cosmology of Martin's world?
I would say it's a cosmology where nothing is certain. I mean, you can contrast that with Lord of the Rings, for instance, Tolkien being a Catholic. In his mythology, everything is clear. You know where the world comes from, you know where it's good, you know where it's evil. It's very well defined, just like the worldview of a Catholic who believes in God, who believes in Jesus, who believes in the devil. Everything is crystal clear, and all what you have to do is just choose which side to follow. In case of George R.R. Martin's universe, there is no certainty. There are a lot of competing religions, and every one of them has been successful at times, less successful at other times. It's not only of choosing the good or the bad, it's actually being lost in the middle of all of these religions. And when we get later to even someone like Melisandre, I mean, she could work great magic, she could bring people back from the dead, but still she was not certain about her own religion. And she was very eager to ask Jon Snow when she resurrected him, what did you see after death? What was there after death? I mean, you brought him back to life. You should know your God is real. But even she is not certain about her own God. And again, that's one more thing that reflects George R.R. Martin's disbelief. Or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like they're doubting that they're gods because there's no anthropomorphic beings coming down and say, do this, do that. I mean, for all we know, there are no gods, and they're just manipulating energies for their own selfish reasons. So It is a very obscure thing, and it's kind of like human history when it comes down to it. We haven't seen Yahweh come down on earth or Allah and say, all right, guys.
It's of course much more realistic than Tolkien's, but then it's different times,
Yeah. And in Tolkien, of course, obviously the Silmarillion, you have all the idea of the gods and the birth of the cosmos and all that good stuff. So like you said, you do get an exact view where you can say this is happening. You could say it's Manichaean, right? In Tolkien, it's black or white.
Exactly. Then there are the various religions. One of the oldest being the old gods of the forest, which was followed in Westeros by the children of the forest. And it's animistic, shamanistic religion, very loose, no religious texts, no certain orders of do's and don'ts, very connected to nature, not much sacraments, pretty much like the old religions that existed before monotheism. So that definitely reflects these religions. And after that, we have the Face of the Seven, which originates in Essos in the east and then is introduced into Westeros. So that kind of reflects Christianity, being a religion that started in the Middle East, but was then later introduced to Europe. And the Face of the Seven is highly organized. You have sacred books, you have certain sets of orders, you have do's and don'ts. Homosexuality is a sin, incest is a sin. So you have a more organized religion that is very, that's obviously modeled after Christianity or Catholicism.
But don't you, in your notes, equate the seven gods with the seven planets, which of course would be pretty normal for anybody to do in ancient times? These are the planets, they're obviously beings.
Of course. George R.R. Martin himself admitted that the idea of the many-faced God in the religion of the seven is modeled after the Christian Trinity. So instead of having a Christian Trinity, you're having a septinity, seven gods. So You have the father, the mother, the warrior, the smith, the maiden, the crone, and the stranger. And number 7, obviously, being a very sacred number in ancient times, because that was the number of the planets, of the old planets back then, because they saw that the sun and moon were planets. And that's also how the days of the weeks are modeled after. So yes, I did equate them. So you have Sunday being a day of the sun, obviously, as it's obvious from the name, and that's the father. Even if you look at I'm not sure about the books, but in the Game of Thrones, the show, if you look at the statue of the father, you have this kind of halo behind his head. It's as if he's a solar deity. And then the mother being the moon day, and then Tuesday. The word Tuesday in English originates from the name of Tyr. Tyr is the god of war in Norse mythology. So that would obviously be the warrior. In Italian, Tuesday is martedì, and Marte is Mars. Mars is the god of war in the Roman time, Ares in the Greeks. And then Wednesday, Woden. Woden is another name for God Odin, who gave one eye in the pursuit of wisdom. So he is a god of wisdom, and that's the crone. The crone in the face of the 7, she represents wisdom. In Italian, Wednesday is Mercoledì. So you got Mercury, Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, obviously being the god of knowledge and magic. And then Thursday is modeled after Thor. And in the religion of the 7, you have the smith, and the smith is holding his own hammer, which is very similar to that of Thor. So you've got Thursday. Then Friday is Freya. The word Friday comes from Freya, which is the name of the goddess of beauty in Norse mythology. In Italian, it's Venerdì. Venerdì coming from Venere. Venere being Venus, goddess of beauty, of course. And then Saturday being Saturn, which in this case is a stranger. Saturn in astrology is called the greater malefic, the bigger evil. Is a very sinister planet in astrology, and that would definitely suit the stranger. And then you have a kind of equilibrium in the 7 gods. You have 3 male, 3 female, and 1 genderless, the stranger being genderless. One more thing is that the stranger is such a dark aspect of God, and in this way he completes the other 6 gods, which are very light. So when you introduce the stranger, you're admitting the dark side of divinity, which is something that the Christian Trinity lacks. In the Christian Trinity, you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're all very light beings. And Carl Jung, when he was examining Christianity, he didn't really like the idea of a Trinity. He thought the number 3 is deficient, is incomplete. And when you have an incomplete number, it seeks to stabilize itself. It seeks to become full, become complete. And the nearest complete number is number 4. So the Christian Trinity is seeking a 4th person of divinity to become a Christian quaternity. And Carl Jung was speculating on who the 4th person would be. At certain times, he thought that this was the Virgin Mary, being female, having a body, so she would kind of equalize the extravagant spirituality of the other 3 persons of the Godhead. And when the Catholic Church talked about how Virgin Mary was taken to heaven after her death, how her physical body rose up to heaven, Carl Jung was ecstatic. He was very happy. He said that now we have a queen in heaven. Now we have a mother. Now heaven has a physical female body up there. And later on, Carl Jung went one step farther, and he decided that the Antichrist is the 4th person of the God. So you have the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Antichrist. And if you look at books like Mysterium Conjunctionis, you have the graph there. You have him drawing that cross, Father, Holy Spirit, Christ, Antichrist. That's his quaternity in its most complete form. So I understand must be shocking, but yes, that's what he came up with eventually.
No. Yeah, so George R. R. Martin gave us 7 gods, but you talk about it's more like Christianity, but in the season, and this also happens in the book, and it's almost like all of a sudden you're getting the plot of the book, I forget, and suddenly this religion shows up in King's Landing, and it's very much like the Catholic Church. And I know when George R. R. Martin was writing this, and he even said part of why this religion, this sort of fundamentalist religion, that was during the Second Gulf War, and he was obviously against the Second Gulf War. So he sort of wrote this evil religion, or this suppressive Christian religion, if you would, as a sort of mockery of, the powers behind the Second Gulf War, the Bush administration. At least that's what he said. But so what do you think about this other religion that, again, in the books just pops out of nowhere? But we know why, because Martin was angry.
Of course. Well, the face militant, or the sparrows, they were introduced, I believe, in season 5 or so. And when I was looking on the internet, there were quite a few people who were saying this doesn't make sense. What does it mean? Someone, a high priest who can manipulate Queen Cersei and the entire royal family, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't know what's the background of that person, but I assume he might have been American, or grew up in Europe somewhere where it's a totally secular country. But me, coming from the Middle East, it makes perfect sense to me. It reminds me particularly of Isis. I mean, Isis, I don't mean the Egyptian goddess of beauty, beautiful Isis. No, I mean the Islamic State.
Right.
So the face militant reminds me of the Islamic State. Because at the end of the day, when we watch something, we forget why it was written for. We forget the actual intentions, and we start to filter it through our own experiences. So for me, someone who grew up in the Middle East, I'm filtering it through my own experiences, and I can see the Islamic State at work, and they're not much different. Mm-hmm. They've been smashing, you see that in the show, they're smashing the idols of the other gods, they're spilling wine, they're raiding whorehouses, they're quite fanatical against homosexuals. And in my opinion, or I believe that Islamic State would agree to all of these things. They've been smashing Christian altars, they've been raiding homosexuals, they've been raiding unbelievers, they've done everything that the High Sparrows have done. But then you've got, I think that George Martin said that he likened it to the Protestant Reformation. Mm. And if you actually pay attention to what the High Sparrow has been saying at one episode, it sounds very Puritanian. And I've got the quote. It's from season 5, episode 7. Now, that took place when the High Sparrow was in a chapel that was under the Great Sept of Baelor. Mm. Just a chapel inside. And he liked it more than the actual sept, the extravagant sept. And he was talking, I believe, to, I'm not sure, to King Tommen or someone else, and he's telling him that he likes this place much better than, and I quote, that great gilded monstrosity up there. He's referring to the Great Sept of Baelor. And he's saying, strip away the gold and ornaments, knock down the statues and pillar, and this is what remains. Something simple and solid and true. This is very Puritanian. This is what Puritanian is about. And iconism, iconoclasts. You don't like icons.
Byzantine Empire, you're right.
They're against all of that. They just want something very Puritanian, very simple, very plain. And he represents that very clearly at this time. One more thing I might want to talk about is the ways that Queen Cersei reacted to them, blowing up the whole Sept of Baelor with everybody inside. And that made one hell of a show. If you're talking about the TV series, I mean, everybody's being blown up, and the great bell is just thrown in the street, and it's smashing pedestrians in the street. It looks great on camera, but in real life, that's not how you face this kind of threat. And I say that from, I would say, as someone who has witnessed this happen, because talking about my homeland, talking about Egypt, back in the 60s, back in the 50s, it was pretty secular. And then we had the Muslim Brotherhood show up. And the Muslim Brotherhood is starting to convert people. They're starting to gain political assistance from the people against the regime. They're telling the people, look, this is what Allah said. Allah says, if you kill, you get beheaded. Allah says, if you steal, you cut your hand. Pretty much like what happened to Jamie Lannister.
Right.
Yeah. If you commit adultery, you get flogged or you get stoned based on your marital status. This is what Allah says. And look at this government. They're locking people up in prisons, and they're not punishing adultery. Do you think that these people know better than Allah? Do you believe that Allah exists? And people have to say yes. So that's what Allah says. It's written in the Quran. Do you doubt the Quran? No, we don't. Okay, so how come you're helping that government which is not executing the commands of Allah? And it makes perfect sense. And what governments do in this case is that they have to start to adopt religion themselves, so that the opposition, the political opposition, has no leverage against them. So the government will say, look, you don't have to join the opposition. We're going to start doing these things. So that's what happened in real politics, in real life, when religion is introduced. If Queen Cersei blows up the Great Sept in real life, then she would give a golden opportunity for anyone who wants to dispose of her. He will just gather people in the street and tell them, look, she is the enemy of the gods. Join me. You're not joining me as being my name. You're joining me because I now represent the gods. We have to get rid of this infidel and we have to rebuild the Sept. This is our religion. And guess what? If people are uneducated, then trust me, there will be a huge uprising. Her head would be hanging on the spike the next day.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, even like you said, she killed the Pope or the Grand Mullah, but it doesn't matter. There's always somebody who's going to take their place when it comes to religion, zealotry.
So let's think about it. If I were Queen Cersei, how would I get rid of the High Sparrow? Let's think about that. I would, to start off, the High Sparrow deposed of an older clergy figure before him. I think he caught him up with a guy in a whorehouse or something. So that's he paraded him naked in the street, and it was a scandal. So what I would do if I were Queen Cersei, I would get someone else who is also in the face of the Seven, but he would be my man. He would be on my payroll, and I would make him start to gather people around him and portray the High Sparrow as someone who stole the title, and start to warn people that the seven gods are not happy that there is a false prophet who is in the Sept, and that there will be wrath to come down. And then the High Sparrow was engaged in, I believe he was engaged in some charity work. He would feed people. That's how we first encountered him. When Queen Cersei goes to see him, he's barefoot, he's with poor people, and he's feeding them.
And there's like Christianity started, and then they got into the good graces of the government. Slowly.
Exactly. So what I would do is implant someone there and have him poison this food. But that would be after months and months of my clergy warning people against him and telling people that there will be punishment. Stop following him. Don't go to him. The gods are going to punish you. And then I will plant someone there and have him poison the food that he's giving to people. And then the people who go there and eat, they will be poisoned. Some of them will die. And then uprising from me to protect the gods and depose of the false prophet. And then I will have my man in the Great Sept, and peace will be restored. That's how you play it.
You should have been Cersei's advisor instead of whoever the hand of the advisor was. So, Evan, just real quick, the Muslim Brotherhood, is this do you think it's another CIA creation, or we're looking at Saudi Arabia? Who brought this poison into Egypt?
I would have to admit in the end of the day. I mean, they may have had some connections with the Nazis, and the
Yeah,
only
that's
way
what
the only reason I'm saying that is because they've been cursing everyone. You're secular, they curse you. You're a communist, they hate you. You're American, you're Zionist, they hate everybody. But they've never, when I go, because I follow some Egyptian pages on Facebook, and I can see some of the commenters, it's very obvious from their comments that they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Not a single time did they level any kind of attack against Hitler or against Nazis. And when they talk about Hitler, even though he was an infidel, from a Muslim point of view, he is an infidel. He is going straight to hell. He was not Muslim. But not a single time did they attack him. Not a single time did they say Al-Kafir Hitler, the infidel. They never referred to him in this way. They refer to Kafir America. They refer to Kafir Stalin. They refer to Kafir all U.S. presidents, all Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, all figures of enlightenment. They're all infidels. But Hitler, not a single time. But in the end of the day, you don't need to be brought. You don't need to be created by an external force. All what you need is a Quran and literal interpretation, and you become a Muslim Brotherhood. That's why they're very successful.
Yeah, well, there you go. In fiction and reality, it's the same demonic play for oppression. What are you going to do? Well, let me take it to you, Nate. Do you have something to say? A question for the audience? A question for yourself, my friend?
Why? You know what? Oswald has a really great question. I'd like to he says, in Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of the Ages, there is a hand of mysteries where the pinky has a key. So, by the way, what he's referring to is that this illustration has a pinky and a key is drawn onto it, representing that somehow the pinky has something to do with a key. So just so the listener gets an idea. And to finish the question, so Oswald's asking, does that correlate to Littlefinger in Game of Thrones at all? So that's what I got for the question there.
You want to take this, Fady?
Well, that's a hard one.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing with Littlefinger, because you're talking about, again, the pagan religions, you're talking about the sort of based on Christianity or the fundamentals Abrahamic religions, but Littlefinger is one of those characters. You see him, and they're basically atheists or secular. They just want to exploit. They even, like in his Chaos is a Ladder speech, that it's just an illusion. I mean, there are people then supposed to be medieval ages that they're basically atheists. They don't think that there are gods, and they probably don't even think that there is magic unless Melisandre showed them something.
Well, George R.R. Martin, I'm pretty sure that he was a very well-read man. So I wouldn't be surprised if he read the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it's a classic. It's a very famous piece of work for anyone who's interested in, esoteric currents of thought. However, did he model Littlefinger after that image? I don't know, but I think it might be unlikely. But then in the end of the day, the connections are all there. We are the ones to establish the connections. We're willing to filter everything out. I mean, the Secret Teaching of All Ages would have a dozen of other illustrations that probably have nothing to do with Game of Thrones, but we would oversee these ones and only focus on the things that make sense. And we have a new Gospel of Light.
There you go. And I'm looking at, hi, everybody there. Hello, Eric. Hello, Ferdinand. There's an Abraxas there saying that the creators of the show are archons and damn them to Hades. I wouldn't go that far. I think they did a good job, but Hollywood is Hollywood. I think it's either going to break your heart or it's going to break your mind. That's the purpose of Hollywood. So get used to one or the other. So, but thanks for everybody who's coming on the chat. Again, if you have any questions, try to write as many question marks you can so that Nate or I can get it. If you do a super chat, you will get at the top of the list. We got Fady Riad, who is actually, I talk about the Virtual Alexandria, but for those who don't know, he is really from Alexandria, aren't you?
There you go.
There
Yes.
you go.
Born and raised in Alexandria, lived there for the first 28 years of my life. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. And now he is in Australia in the middle of winter while we're enjoying a nice summer over here in the West. And,
I'll get back to you when it's February.
There you go. I know. I look at pictures and I get very jealous when I look at people, friends from Australia. So it is what it is. Yes, to everything, there is a season turn. I'm singing the birds or singing Ecclesiastic. That's what I'm doing. But Rosemary is asking, is Cersei Sophia? At first I would say there is no way, but I'm trying to think of a Sophianic character in the show at all. What do you think about Fady?
There was a certain scene where Tywin Lannister, who happens to be my favorite bad guy of the show, he was talking to King Tommen right after Joffrey died. And we're all happy Joffrey finally died, and he talks to Tommen. And he's trying to do a better job with him. He knew that Joffrey was a hopeless case, so he didn't really show any kind of grief over him dying. And he immediately picked Tommen like, good, now it's finally you're the king. Now let me try to instill some wisdom into you. And he's telling him, what do you think is the greatest virtue? Is it courage? Is it strength? Is it being fair? And eventually he tells him that the greatest virtue is being wise, Sophia. And Cersei, being the daughter of Tywin, I think in season 8, after Tywin was dead, she told her brother, that I've been living with my dad for a very long period of time. Do you think I haven't learned anything from him? So she must have learned a lot of wisdom from her father, who was a very wise man. Only thing I really disliked about him was the way he treated Tyrion, his son. But apart from that, I can't blame him for anything. To be honest with you, I can't even blame him for the Red Wedding. I mean,
he saved a lot of lives. He saved thousands of lives.
Yeah. Robb Stark was not in his own hospitality. I mean, shame on the phrase for killing him. But Tywin, he wasn't his guest. So if he conspires with someone else, he gets killed when he's the guest of the phrase. Then it's Walder Frey. He should be ashamed of himself for killing his guest. But Tywin, Robb was never his guest. So I have to admit, if I were in his place, the Red Wedding would still take place. I know a lot of people would hate me for saying this, but I have to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was pretty Machiavellian, and he really only cared about his house. I think in the books, the Lannisters is not an ancient house. He basically built it from nothing to the ground up. I guess he was an entrepreneur of sorts. Wow. Not as wacky as the entrepreneurs today, but I think that was his thing. So yeah, but as far as a Sophianic character, I mean, I did write an article. I mean, I'm trying to think, maybe Arya for defeating the Night King. I mean, but before we get into the Night King and all that, which we definitely want to discuss, let's talk about the other religion. Now we're going to start getting a little bit on the Gnostic side, and that is the Lord of Light. Rio, there you go. Tell us about
my mind. You're reading my mind.
Well, it's the one left, one that we haven't covered.
I mean,
so tell us about the Lord of Light, and I don't mean the Roger Zelazny novel, which is one of my favorites.
I mean, isn't this what got all of this started? I mean, I'm not sure if people following us would know, but the reason why you've asked me to be the guest today is because I shared in the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis, I shared the quote from Melisandre: there is one hell, and that's the one we're living in now. And then you're like, oh, you're watching Game of Thrones. Well, I should get you on the show. Let's talk about it.
Right.
So yes, the Lord of Light, it originates in the East, just like the Face of the Seven. In the Wars of Melisandre, they believe in a God of light and love and joy, and the good and the God of darkness, evil and fear, eternally at war. So when you have two gods opposing each other, you're not talking about the Christian God creating the devil, who is his subordinate. You're talking about two gods who go tete-a-tete, who go face to face, head to head. So you're talking more about a dualistic religion. obviously most famous dualistic religion in history is Zoroastrianism. And there is also Manichaeism, which is the Gnostic version of Zoroastrianism. The quote of Melisandre to Shireen that there is only one hell, and that's the one we're living in now. Now, this is not very Zoroastrian. This tends to be more in the Manichaean. But then, me being a skeptic, I can't help but ask myself, is this quote canonical? Is that really what they believed in? Or is this just an attempt by the writers at witty dialogue? I have to be honest, I just think it was a piece of witty dialogue. The writers just like, when you're a writer, you always like to put twists in the words and make things sound catchy. And so I'm not sure. I've never read the books. Do the books say anything about the religion of light, talking about this world as being the only hell? I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So in this case, yeah, it's very vague. You can't really decide if it's more on the Manichaean or Zoroastrian side. And let's be quite honest. I mean, Mani himself, Mani, the prophet of Manichaeism, he was brutally executed by the Zoroastrians.
Very true.
I think they flayed him, and they stuffed his effigy, and they put him on a door for everyone to see him stuffed, and horrible stuff. Not much different from the Game of Thrones. Even more horrible than the Boltons. The Boltons was their flayed man.
Right.
So apart from that, the Lord of Light is the only religion that really can work magic in the series. I mean, there is also some magic performed by the children of the forest, who happen to worship the old gods of the forest. But at least in our in the time frame where the series is set, the only miracles that we see on screen, perhaps apart from the creation of the Night King, it's all performed in the name of the Lord of Light, R'hllor. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. R'hllor.
I don't know. Yeah, something. Sounds like the city where Cthulhu's from. Really, something like that. Yes.
So yeah, it's the only religion that can really perform miracles. And despite that, as I mentioned earlier, even Melisandre herself doesn't know is not sure if her God is true, and she's very eager to ask Jon Snow what is there after death. So
and this Lord of Light isn't exactly nice. Remember, she does this magic thing and gets pregnant with the demon, and in a few seconds, the demon goes and kills. I forgot his name. That was competing with her master. She has the daughter of her master. What's his name? Sacrifice.
Renly Baratheon. Right. Shireen Baratheon. Renly was the brother of Stannis.
Right. Kills. Yes.
Yeah, and his daughter Shireen.
Right. So you wonder if it also reminds you, I don't know if you're aware, but in Zoroastrianism, there was a movement that came out later called Zervanism. And in this one, Zervanism said that Ahriman was controlling Earth completely, and that the higher god, Ahura Mazda, was trying to break through. So it sort of there was a period where Zoroastrianism took a very Gnostic turn. And you wonder in Game of Thrones, is Melisandre really following a good god who's doing all this kind of, Machiavellian stuff to get things done?
Well, again, if we are to put George R.R. Martin's atheism in perspective, I think what he's trying to say is that there is a lot of evil performed in this world in the name of God. That God is a man-eater, as the Gospel of Philip says. So, again, that's some of his atheism at work there. But then, talking back about Melisandre not being a believer despite working miracles, I mean, this gives you some food for thought. Are we meant to believe in a religion simply because there are miracles performed in its name? I mean, today we don't see any miracles around, but let's suppose that finally we have someone who is willing to do miracles, who is willing to accept any challenges, Randy challenges, and he can perform miracles. There is no explanation. This guy can perform miracles. And then he happens to follow a certain religion. Does that mean that this religion is true? It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the Bible. The Bible, the Gospels, they elaborate on the miracles allegedly performed by Jesus, because that would prove, according to Bible logic, that Jesus was indeed the Son of God. But then the same Bible is warning us from following the Antichrist, who will be able to perform miracles. So miracles are no longer a valid criterion to judge if someone is really representing God. So
right, and think of the priests of Baal and Simon Magus. They were all heretics.
Yeah. So it doesn't make much sense. Let me see if there is anything else I want to talk about. Yes, there is one last quote from Melisandre that I might want to mention before we move on. At a certain point, she's explaining to the wife of Stannis Baratheon that not all, but most of her miracles are actually tricks. They're just stage magic. So that's what she tells her. Most of these powders and potions are lies, deceptions to make men think they witnessed our Lord's power. Once they step into his light, they will see the lie for what it was, a trick that led them to the truth. And that was one of the quotes of Melisandre that I really thought about, and I couldn't get out of my head. This is really smart, and it echoes something. It echoes something from the letters of Saint Paul in Christianity. In Romans chapter 3, verse 7, he says, "But if through my falsehood," sometimes translated as lie, "but if through my falsehood or lies, God's truthfulness abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner?" And that gives you something to think about. Can you really use lies to lead people to the truth? Can certain spiritual truths be only explained through lies? I don't know.
No, I mean, the Rosicrucians started as a pious fraud, as a joke. I mean, you never know. QAnon could be a joke, even if it inspires a lot of people. I mean, it reminds me of that quote in Alan Moore's V for Vendetta. Your own father used lies to tell the truth. That's what artists do. That's what poets do. We twist things around, and hopefully you'll get a sort of koan awakening. So I see you nodding, Nate. You agree?
Oh, dude, I mean, I was thinking V for Vendetta, so you said it, so you preach, brother.
Peace, man. Peace, man. You have anything to say, Nate, or any questions?
Yeah, we had a question in the chat.
Oh, I see Vance is in the audience. Hey, Vance.
Oh, wow. Hey, Vance.
Where's your background down there?
Yeah, I can't really change mine. Sorry, guys. You got the shiny though. It's just gonna reflect back to you whatever you see in it. Woo. The question was: is there an Anunnaki analog in the Game of Thrones? And I was wondering. I would like to add. We're talking about these systems of magic. Where do dragons and these kind of like the magic of dragons or the magic like Nightwalkers is mentioned? Are these all just technically Deus Ex Machinas? Or, so I wanted to add that. But the audience member asked if there was an Anunnaki, and I'm adding that onto it.
Well, the dragons is obviously evolution, because that's all there is. The universe is an accident, and the dragons came by through evolution very logically. But anyway.
Dragon was, the Valis was a dragon. Got it.
But what do you think about the dragons, Fady? Or do you want to move on into the White Walkers and the Wall?
We could get to that, but then when you mentioned the evolution of dragons, I immediately switched from thinking about as fantasy writer into proper science, and I'm thinking, how feasible is the evolution of dragons? And the first thing I thought about is fire. How can they spit fire? Fires that wouldn't burn them from the inside. And only way I think of is two chemicals joining together in the mouth to produce fire. But then this can't evolve because it's irreducible complexity. I started thinking about arguments about evolution, so I don't want to get into that. Michael B, he would love to hear about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
There's one last religion here, which is the religion of the many-faced God. the god of death. And that brings
of
us to the.
course.
So this brings us to what I call the story of two initiations: the initiation of Arya Stark and the initiation of Bran Stark. And I would like to talk about these two, contrast them, and after that we can get to the Night King and season 8 and how we could have saved it had we been hired by HBO. It's really unfortunate they haven't hired me, man.
Cersei didn't hire you. The Muslim Brotherhood didn't hire you. You just got to luck, man. Well, hopefully HBO will get you next time. But yeah, please take it away, my friend.
Okay, so let's discuss the initiation of Arya Stark and Bran Stark, and I think they're a little bit at opposites. So we start with Arya Stark. Arya moves to the city of Braavos, where the worship of the many-faced god is. Well, it's a seizable minority there. They have their own temple. And obviously, she's going there because she wants to learn how to become a faceless assassin. And this way, she can avenge her father, Ned Stark, and avenge her brother, Robb Stark. So obviously, the faceless men are people who worship death, and they can see death in all the other religions. They can see him in the stranger of the face of the seven. They can see him in some of the gods of the old gods of the forest. They can see him in various other religions. They're professional assassins who follow their own religion, and this reminds me of history of
Hassan Sabah. Yeah, Hassan Sabah. Yeah.
Al-Asasiyun. Al-Asasiyun means the basic ones. And they were
an Arabic word, right? Or it started
Assassiyun, the basic one. Arabic word, it is. And that's how they got the name. The English word assassin is brought from Arabic al-Asasiyun, the basics. And there is a misconception that it comes from al-Hashashun, those who smoke hashish, those who smoke weed.
Yeah, it was more of a polemic against them.
Exactly. So they were kind of Muslim ninjas. They were not Sunni. I mean, now predominantly Muslims are Sunni Muslims. They belong to an Ismaili sect of Shia Islam, Naziri Ismaili sect of Shia Islam, and they were just excellent. Yes, these are the ones.
Yes,
not the Christian Nazarenes, Naziris. Yeah, and they excelled at psychological warfare, at surgical strikes. They were not people who would go in battle and fight other people. They were more of Red Wedding kind of people, if you know what I mean, just surgical strikes. And so when you think about the initiation of Arya Stark, she wants to be faceless. And they say that
backing up, the assassins were serious. I mean, they scared the shit out of Saladin and all the other Muslims because the caliphates wanted them gone, and they just by again threats, assassinations, they got everybody off their backs. And these days, these Malis are they're building hospitals and kind of nice people.
They are. Obviously, the caliphs were all Sunni Muslims, so the Ismailis were heretics to them. That's created the fiction, the friction between them, and they finally disbanded when the Mongols invaded. They decided they were going to lay down their weapons, live in peace. They were not killed, and they didn't kill anybody, and that's how they disbanded. The Mongols. It took Hulagu Khan to end their mess.
Even the biggest genocidal people in the world, in the history of mankind.
And today, Genghis Khan is being almost worshipped as a god in Mongolia because, in their opinion, he put the country on the map pretty much.
Right.
So when you come back to Arya Stark, I would like to think of her initiation in an allegorical way. I would like to think that to become a faceless man or woman is to lose your empirical self. And if you lose your empirical self, then you lose any fear of death. If there is no longer an I, then there is no longer fear of death. And this reminds me of God Shiva in Hinduism. I mean, God Shiva is a destroyer god, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, you're worshiping Brahma, the creator god. Okay, that's something that most people can understand. But you're worshiping a god of destruction. That should be a devil, not a god. But then the most sophisticated Hindu answer to this is that Shiva is the destroyer of the empirical self. And once you let go of the ego, then you realize that you are Brahman. You're the transcendent divine being. So I was hoping for Arya Stark's initiation to be allegorical of this. I was hoping to see her change as a person after she undergoes this initiation. But this is not really the case. I mean, Arya Stark, in the end, she walks away the same person. She has become an excellent assassin. She can feed Walder Frey his own children before she slaughters him, and she can work great things. But her motivations didn't change. She still wants to avenge her brother.
Was that scene out of Titus from Shakespeare? Remember when based on a Roman general who killed? Well, never mind. Go on.
So yes, she doesn't change. She walks away, retains her personality, retains her desire to avenge her father and brother. She kind of have a one-night stand with Gendry, but then she tells him that she's not the marrying type. She breaks his heart. Yeah. So, but she doesn't really change. So her initiation, I would have liked to see all of this combat to be allegorical of combat against the demons inside or something, but this is not the case, which contrasts her initiation with a real initiation, that of Bran Stark. We first encounter Bran Stark as a very curious little child who's going around and who starts climbing and seeing something that he shouldn't be seeing. He sees Cersei and her brother Jaime, at the act of love, and this results in him being thrown out the window, and he falls and he becomes a cripple. And I think that when you think about it, what was he thinking? What was Bran Stark thinking when he started climbing? What was he looking for? You can say that he was looking for trouble. And that would make sense. Was he trying to get himself into trouble? Was he trying to get himself thrown out of the window? The other day, I was reading a part of Memories, Dreams, and Reflections by Carl Jung. And he said something very similar. He said that when he was a little one, he placed himself in the way of another child so that the other child would push him away, and he fell down and he hit his head very hard. And he started having attacks and fits after that, which really scared his father. And he started to admit that he wanted this to happen to him. He loved being sick, which is a very morbid thing to say, that someone loves being sick. But that was the case with Jung. And when you think about Bran Stark, I have to be very careful when I say this, but I think, I might be mistaken, but I think that Bran Stark is the fantasy equivalent of a child who is coping with autism. I know it might not be politically correct to say that, but I'll say it. I think that he is the fantasy allegory of a child who's coming to cope with his own autism, who's trying to find his true self. So he discovers a secret, Jaime and Cersei, and that gives him this feeling of superiority, that he knows something that nobody else knows. It gives him some appreciation of his own self. It also gets him in trouble. It gets him bedridden, which is maybe what he wanted to happen. And then he starts to be terrified by visions of the three-eyed raven. If we are to speak in psychological terms, I would say that the three-eyed raven is the self archetype. It's his self trying to communicate with him. He's trying to reach the process of individuation, to find his place in life, to discover his true self. And for that, he will have to go and travel and find the three-eyed raven. The first visions are very scary. They're very irritating. And when you think about the monomyth of Joseph Campbell, it always starts with the call. When this deep psychological currents are calling you to start the journey, to leave your place of comfort, to overcome this inertia. You want to stay there where you are. This is inertia in physics. You have to overcome this, just like when you're pressing the pedal so hard in a car just to get it started. That's when most of the petrol is being used, just to push it first. So it's very irritating. But then he has to go and find the three-eyed raven. And where is the three-eyed raven? This is very important, extremely important. The three-eyed raven is located on the other side of the wall. He's located in the uncharted territory of the North, which is the subconscious. You don't find him in this normal place of humans and order and shape. You find him in that unknown place full of secrets, horrors, and white walkers and terrors. That's where the self is. And it's a very perilous journey. It's a very dangerous journey to cross the wall, the boundary between the conscious and the subconscious, and go there and see and meet the three-eyed raven. So it's a very psychologically charged way. And he has his helpers. He is joined by his friends who sacrifice themselves for him. And eventually he goes there and he meets the three-eyed raven, and then he becomes the three-eyed raven, which reminds me of a quote. And I'm very frustrated by the fact that I can't remember where I read it. That's what the quote says. And then I became what I saw. I became what I saw. So he went there to see the three-eyed raven, and then he ends up becoming the three-eyed raven. So that's a transformation, and that's the main element of initiation that was missing in the case of Arya Stark. She went a pseudo initiation because there was no transformation. But in case of Bran Stark, there is a very obvious transformation, and Bran Stark becomes the memory of the world. He knows everything in the past, so he possesses great powers, but he never smiles. He's not happy. You notice that he's
very stoic.
He ends up being a prisoner of his own knowledge. And this reminds me of the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. In the chemical wedding, Christian Rosenkreuz, he is one of the very few people to witness all the alchemical mysteries in their entirety. Other people are just given simple moral code and left in the other room. And in the last night of the wedding, he sees everything. He knows everything, but he doesn't depart. He becomes a new doorman. He becomes a new guardian. He gets locked there. And when you witness something so extraordinary, you can't go back to the world of life. You should, but not in all cases. There is always, in the monomyths of Joseph Campbell, there is going to the mysteries, and then there is the return. You get all the things you've learned, and you return back to society to benefit society from what you've learned. But the return is very difficult, and a lot of people are so overwhelmed by the strong psychological currents that they see on the other side of the world that they become prisoners there. And this is what happens to Bran. Even think about it, he is very aloof. He's very he is unable to possess any emotional connection with people. And think about Theon Greyjoy. Theon Greyjoy, who betrayed him, who tried to kill him at a certain time, even though eventually he didn't have the guts to really kill him, and he killed other kids and burned them to look like
Theon,
Yeah, and in the end, Theon redeems himself by coming back, by joining him, and eventually Theon gives his own life. He gets killed by the Night King to defend Bran Stark.
And that's the only time that Bran says something nice to somebody. He says, Theon, you're a good man, thank you. After his transformation, he has nothing kind to say about anybody.
Exactly, but even the way he says it is very mechanistic.
Yeah.
Theon, you're a good man.
Good man.
If you guys notice about like what the ultimate plan, like we could mention Eighth Sphere with Ahriman or whatever, but I hope we're not jumping too far ahead by saying that who do they want to give the whole thing over to, but to the person who's basically an AI?
Yes, that's what yeah, that has been the theory. I think it was Crow 77 who said Bran is a great lesson on AI taking over the world. And I want to say thank you, Rosemary, for the donation. Really appreciate it. For others, we have dealt with the idea of Gnosticism through Zoroastrianism. So move back to the beginning. I do have an article where I talk about the Gnostic themes in Game of Thrones. I'll have it on our show notes. It's called The Gnostic Apocalypse That Is Game of Thrones. But thanks everybody for being here. And Fady, what do you think? Bran AI, or you want to continue?
Well, again, as I said, we filter the things we watch through our own experiences. So we're living in an age of AI, so it's easy for us to see it in a lot of myths, in a lot of stories. Is that what they had in mind? I don't know. I can't tell. I didn't try the series, so I can't tell. But then there are always the similarities, and we are the ones to create the relationships, and by that we're creating something new.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, the ancient Greeks had the myth of Talos, and Pandora was a robot. So, and they wondered did Talos suffer when Jason destroyed him. So, these things were there. I think they've always been. We've always wondered about these things.
The last thing I want to say about Bran Stark is that, and don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of Bran Stark. I mean, if I were a Game of Thrones character, I would have been Bran Stark, to be honest. But I have to say that he was a very poor choice for king. I mean, I assume everybody watching has already watched season 8, and eventually Bran becomes a king after all is said and done. But I think that he's a very poor choice. They justified choosing him in the series by saying that he was not interested in being king, and this is true. So he has no dark intentions. He has no dark intentions. He is not interested in being a king. He is not willing to play the game of blood for the throne. But in the same time, as I again said, he is a prisoner of the other side. He is a prisoner of the subconscious. He doesn't really come back to our world. He is detached from our world. And as a matter of fact, the series can hint to this. If you watch the last episode, you would see the small council meeting. They're meeting without the king, and eventually they're joined by Bran Stark, and everyone is like, "Your Grace," and they're saluting him. And he just looks at them very briefly and says, we happen to be missing a Master of Whispers. We happen to be missing a Master of War. And Tyrion tells him, we will find suitable candidates and we'll bring him forth. And he says, good, thank you. Please do proceed with the rest. Yeah, do carry on with the rest. Do proceed with the rest, something of the sort. So he is totally detached. So I doubt if he would make a great king. I don't know. Like, think of someone who's very, you don't have to be a really wise person to become a manager. Like, think about some of the wisest people we've read for, someone like Joseph Campbell. Can you imagine Joseph Campbell standing in a warehouse and dealing with workers and employees and put this here, put that there, and why did you do this? Please don't be back, don't be late again to work. I don't think so.
But I think Tyrion is the de facto king. I think, as Bran said, you need to pay for your sins, so you're going to do it this time, and you're going to do it right. So he's pretty much the king, and he's probably the best person to be king when it comes down to it.
I agree. He has great interpersonal skills, very likable person. Doesn't like he is obviously a very short man. He is what we would call today a dwarf, but he doesn't let this affect him psychologically. It doesn't let him set him apart from the rest of humanity the way that Bran Stark is isolated by his illness. In case of Tyrion, he just copes, he just mingles. People keep on making fun of him all the time, and he doesn't care. So he's the ultimate extrovert. He would be a great king.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to get to the Night King. Again, I did write a story on man, I am just following.
You are reading my mind.
I know. I am Bran in this world, man. I got the third-eyed raven. I know somebody mentioned the drowned god. I don't know if you want to get in. I know in the book there's not it's not that fleshed out. But yeah, let's get to the Night King first.
I might say one word about the Drowned King. I think it's a play on Jesus. I think it's a play on Jesus. Again, George R.R. Martin is an atheist, so he's just making fun of the dying God. I mean, you have one comedian. I'm not sure what was his name, but he said if Jesus was executed in the early 20th century, we would have had Catholic nuns wearing electric chairs instead of crosses. So, and the drowned God wants people drowned. The Lord of Light wants people burnt at the stake. So it just, I think, another way of George Martin just poke fun of Christianity. To that's the way I understand it. I don't have access to his brain, but that's how I see it. You know. Anyway, the Night King. So I understand there is, because we are very interested in the Gnostic mythology, there is a lot of talk about the Night King being the Demiurge. I will get to that in a moment, but my initial understanding of the Night King is that he is the personification of chaos. He is the personification of disorder and chaos. And what he really reminds me of is not the Gnostic myth, but rather the myths of the ancient Egyptians, my ancestors, my great ancestors, the ancient Egyptians, how they speak of this world being like a sphere. The cosmos is like a sphere of order, which arose out of an infinite sea of chaos that stretches to all directions infinitely. And they gave that sea the name of Nun or Nu. So the sea of Nu or Nun is chaos. And this has always existed. Chaos has always existed. But then in the middle of it, at some time in the past, there arose a sphere of order, of light, which is the world that we inhabit. And our world, in this sense, is pretty much an anomaly. An anomaly is something that was not meant to be. And when an anomaly comes into existence, there is one thing that's very characteristic about it. It doesn't last for long. You have an anomaly, but then existence will see to it that it's erased. It wasn't meant to be there. Well, it got lucky, it existed, but we will not let it exist for long. We must get rid of it very soon.
The algorithm's going to come and fix it.
Exactly. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy grows with time. Disorder grows with time. You can't get order out of disorder. So the Night King, I think, is a personification of chaos, is a personification of disorder, of death. And that's why he's very keen to kill Bran, because Bran is the memory of this world, and he wants to get rid of that. He wants this erased. So in this sense, he's more of a chaos monster, pretty much like Apep or Apophis, as the Greeks later called him, who is the monster of, or snake of chaos, who wants to eat this world and erase it. So that's how I understand him. You can think of him as being a very ancient menace to existence that went into hibernation, and that would be coming back, that went into hibernation and was defeated many thousands of years ago, and that would be coming back at a certain stage in the future. And if you follow the series, I don't know about the books, but if you follow the series, we are never told how the White Walkers were defeated in the first war that happened thousands of years ago. And I think that this is a very wise decision, because if you will mention how they were defeated, you will be undermining their threat. If they were defeated in the past, they can be defeated again in the future. So you'll be undermining their threat. It's very important to keep them mysterious, novel, and with as little information known about as possible. This way, they can pose a fresh, new threat to existence. It definitely reminds me of Lovecraft. Lovecraftian novels, that is not dead, which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die. He's been there in the past. He was horrible. He was horror, absolute horror. And now he went back to hibernation. He's not defeated yet. He's still there somewhere. But a lot of time has passed that we now forgot about him. And a lot of people are starting to think that the White Walkers are just a story. They're not real. But they are real, and they're coming for you. So I would say that the Night King is very Lovecraftian. However, if we want to interpret him in such a way to make him seem like he was a demiurge, we can do it. And this is the power of reinterpretation. It doesn't matter what they originally intended. We are going to project our own ideas on the story. That's what the gospel of lie is all about. You're projecting your own ideas about on the story. So let's see that the Night King and the Demiurge, they do have a lot of similarities. If you want to make them, if you want to equate them, let's see. The Demiurge came into existence due to a mistake. Sophia made a mistake, and it's different in the Sessian myth. She wanted to create something without the consent of her consort.
Correct.
In the Valentinian myth, she wanted to understand the father, Besos. She wanted to understand him directly, and regardless of what the mistake was, eventually the Demiurge comes to exist due to a mistake. And this is the same thing that happens to the Night King. He is created by the children of the forest to help them or aid them in their fight against humans. But then he breaks free. And the word here is very important, breaks free from the children of the forest and assumes an existence of his own, which is exactly what happened to the Demiurge. He breaks free from Sophia, and he hides in the cloud of light that the secret book of John talks about, and he assumes an agenda of his own. And then he turns against his mother. In the Gnostic myth, of course, the Demiurge then abducts Sophia and tortures her and dismembers her and cuts her to little pieces. And that's what the Demiurge and that's what the Night King eventually does to Leaf. Leaf is that she is one of the children of the forest, and she is the one to create the Night King. And he turns against her, and one of the White Walkers or one of the undead kills Leaf in the same episode. The episode where we know why Hodor is called Hodor. It's a very emotional, very sentimental episode.
Pathos,
Hodor. It almost brought tears to my eyes. It's a very sentimental episode. But in that episode, Leaf, who was the person to create the Night King, she herself gets killed by the White Walkers or by the undead. So that's another similarity between the Demiurge and between the Night King. And eventually, if you think about the Night King, he is not really a personification of death. He doesn't just kill people and just leave them there lying. He resurrects them. So his mission is not a mission of execution. It's a mission of conversion. He's converting people into zombies. His mission is not one of death, but of conversion.
Into copies of himself, and poor copies of something that's real. And their consciousness is still in there because they can still fight. Dragons can breathe. Basically, he's hiding their divine spark and creating a copy for his fake realm.
Exactly. A rash improvisation. This is the expression of Jorge Luis Borges in his short story, Three Versions of Judas. Beautiful Gnostic little story. And that's how he describes it. So that's what exoteric religiosity does to people. Do and don't. There is no mystical part. There is the esoteric religiosity, which probably we here in Aeon Byte are interested in. And there is the exoteric religiosity of the fundamentalists in America and of the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't appreciate the stuff. To them, this is not religion. What religion to them is facts. Do this, don't do this, and they're all copies of each other's. It's all about control, and that's what the Demiurge is about, control. And it reaches really ridiculous degrees in some religions. In Islam, for instance, you can only enter the toilet with your left foot, not with your right foot. Can you imagine that? Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yes. You can only enter the toilet with the left foot, not with the right one. And if you're going to wash your hands and body, tawaddu, before prayer, you have to do it in a very mechanistic way. You do this first, you do this second. Mm-hmm. It's all about control. That's what the Demiurge is about, and that's what the Night King is about. He's just moving all of these undead as puppets. So, in the end of the day, we can still make a very sound argument that the Night King is the Demiurge.
Yes, I would agree. And also, my point too is, yes, he has his world where everybody's just a copy. But as Einar Thomason wrote, when it comes, at least for the Valentinians, there are no archons, millions of archons. There is only one demiurge, and every archon is an aspect of his ego or his desire, his control. So when he dies, all the zombies and other die. So it's the same thing. If you vanquish the demiurge, the archons will go with them. So that's what I saw too.
Yep. Now we get to the final point.
The final point. Well, first let's pause for a second. Nate, any questions or comments from our audience? Everybody's having a good discussion there.
Seems pretty good. I would say that it is, in a sense, definitely the bringer of chaos, because entropy, or how you say death, is required as part of a natural system. By interrupting the death process, you absolutely interrupt the natural order, and that itself is chaos.
Well said indeed. Well said. All right. Well, I see people talking. They brought back the Nazis. Yeah, we got to have the Nazis. And other really interesting concave Earth. Very cool discussions as always. So let us get to the end, the last season there, Fady.
Oh, 1.7 million people signed the petition to have season 8 remade. And I quote, with competent writers, unquote.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Okay, so I assume everybody watched season 8, so I'm not gonna start saying what happened there. I'll just,
if you do, put it on pause.
Yeah.
Take out the volume.
I'll just get to the point. Why does everybody hate season 8? And let's break it down to 2 basic points. There are quite a few reasons why, but a lot of them honestly don't make sense to me or are just very minor. So the 2 major points why season 8 was not well received, just like the previous seasons, is 1, the Night King. He was portrayed as the ultimate threat to existence. I mean, if you are going to start watching Game of Thrones from season 1, episode 1, the very first scene is not about Cersei, it's not about the Mad King, it's not about any of these things. It's about the first watchman who sees the White Walker,
mm-hmm.
and they realize they're back.
Yeah,
this is the
same
first,
in the book. That's the first scene in the book.
This is the opening sequence. So you've been building the hype for 7 seasons about the White Walkers being the last fight, the big fight, the big thing, the boss of bosses.
Yeah, Armageddon.
Armageddon, and then you have them defeated in the 2nd or 3rd episode.
Third
of
episode,
8.
yeah.
So this is the first point, and it does make sense. We have to admit it does make sense. And there's another point, and that obviously is being Dany acting totally out of character and putting the whole place on fire, committing a war crime, killing everyone, doing what her father wanted to do. I mean, that's what the Mad King wanted to do. He wanted to burn them all. Yeah, and that's what she did. She burned them all.
Yeah, before he could. Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. So why is she doing it this way? Why would she just act this way? And obviously, the reason that a lot of people would understand is that the writers are trying to shock us. The writers are trying to deliver something that we didn't expect, but it doesn't stem from the story. When you see the Red Wedding, you realize that George R.R. Martin wrote the Red Wedding. Someone wrote it, but it flows very smoothly from the building up to it. It makes sense in the story. But when you see Dany acting out of character and killing everybody, you don't see it coming from the story. You actually see screenwriters writing, and that's when they fail. They should be invisible. A great screenwriter should act in a way to make him look invisible. He doesn't exist. The story is telling itself. So that's the major point. And at this stage, why would Dany act out of character? The only explanation is repression. Only psychological explanation is repression. If she being a Targaryen, if she has these dark impulses of murder, of execution, of cruelty, and she's been repressing them for so long, it would make sense for them to come back at her instead of conversing with these instincts or with these feelings, instead of trying to understand where they're coming from, how to be dealt with. Instead of that, she's just repressing them. She's just burying them under the surface. Then she's creating tension. And at a certain point, the volcano will erupt and she will go crazy. Now, that would make sense, but we are never shown her fighting against her demons in the episodes before. And that's why when she acts in this way, it doesn't make sense. If they showed her having nightmares of herself killing people and then she waking up and she's like, no, I'm not going to do this. If she is about to execute someone or thinks of executing someone and then at the last second forgiving them, then you will start to see that she's repressing something. And then when that something comes back, it would make sense. But they didn't make it this way. They just had her burn Lord Varys. They had her burn the father and brother of Sam Tilly.
Exactly.
So it's just two little acts of understandable cruelty, and then she goes crazy. No, it doesn't work. It fades.
Somebody mentioned, I think it was Rosemary in the chat room, what about the Philip K. Dick idea to fight the Empire is to become the Empire? It's to be infected by its derangement. Could her ambition, it wasn't her anger, it was just, happens when you have ambition. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. You have to take the place in the wheel of karma. There is no good government, and as me as an anarchist would say.
So at this stage, I might discuss very briefly an alternate ending that a YouTuber wrote, and it makes a lot of sense. So very quickly, I'll go through it. So it starts exactly like season 8. We might post the link later if you like. I have the link, so we might be posting it. So
at the end of the show, send me the link, and I'll link to your homepage and my story, so everybody on the show notes, YouTube, whatever, can find this.
Will do. So season 8 starts perfectly normal, and then we have the episode where the White Walkers invade Winterfell, and we have Jon Snow fighting the Night King, and spectacular fight. At the end, Jon Snow is on the verge of dying, but he just grabs out a dragon glass dagger, and he stabs the Night King, but the Night King doesn't die. And it's revealed that he is impervious to the Dragonstone or Dragon Glass, I'm not sure what it's called, but it doesn't kill him. So everybody has to escape, and Winterfell falls. So you have the White Walkers invading the city, and now with Winterfell out of the way, the path and the road for the White Walkers is open to go straight to King's Landing. So the heroes flee, they have to escape, they flee, and they go to Queen Cersei, and they ask her for protection. And she agrees on one condition: Dany has to bend the knee. And then Dany decides that she will have to save everyone, so she just obliges, and she just bends the knee. Queen Cersei lets them in, and then the White Walkers advance, and they walk, and they close up on the city and surround it. They lay siege, and Bran Stark finally comes up with the only way to kill the Night King, and that is to burn the tree under which he was created. And this is very beautiful because it brings some symmetry. When you're talking about mythology relies on symmetry. So he was created under a tree. For him to die, that tree itself must be burned. He derives his strength and his magic from that tree. But then it's revealed that if this tree is to be burnt, then all magic in the world will come to an end. And that means that the resurrected Jon Snow will die.
Whoa.
So it was really witty. I really like the writing. So you're tying two things here together: victory with a tragedy, which is genius in my opinion. I mean, he's a really smart guy. I have to give him
Yeah.
that. So for you to kill the Night King, Jon Snow will have to die. And then Dany, she flies with the dragon, and of course the Night King will have to intercept her, will have all the spectacular visuals and effects, but eventually she will ask the dragon to burn them all. The dragon will Dracarys them all. The tree will burn. The Night King will burn with the tree because then he dies, and Daenerys will still emerge victorious because she never gets burned. She's a Targaryen. She doesn't get burned. So she still lives, but Jon Snow dies. And then she just it's revealed that she was pregnant with Jon Snow, and 5 years later Jon Snow is dead, and she has a little child, and she tells him that his father was a great man, and she's sitting on the throne. So I don't like the ending, but I really like the idea of how you get to kill the Night King. I like the idea of Winterfell falling, because that makes the Night King look like he was really the real villain of the story. I like the way Jon Snow dies, sacrifices himself. So I like all of this, but I don't like the ending. What was really genius about the original ending, the ones that we really saw in season 8, is the dragon burning the Iron Throne. Because the Game of Thrones is not a story. The Game of Thrones is real. It's real in every single bit. It shed seas of blood throughout history. And over what? Over iron thrones, not golden thrones. Iron thrones, cheap, very cheap iron thrones. But people kill themselves for it. And think about how many people died in the Game of Thrones. And then think again about how many great rulers do we remember from the past. We remember probably 20 or 30 kings, unless if you're a historian. If you're a historian, you would remember more. But the average guy would just remember 20 or 30 people. But there were millions who died in this game for people that nobody even remembers, for kings and queens that are only left as footnotes in history books. Nobody remembers today. So the dragon burning the Iron Throne, I can't have it any other way. So if I were to rewrite it, taking hints from the real ending and from that magnificent YouTuber here, I would have the Night King really dying under the tree, and then I would have Dany commit a horrible execution, but one that can be justified. I would have her shred Cersei to pieces, for instance, and that would be very rewarding to viewers, and they would understand it. She's killing Cersei. After all what Cersei has done, that would make sense. But after that, I would have her on the verge of killing someone else who is really innocent, like Gendry, for instance. Gendry is the son of Robert Baratheon.
Right.
And Robert Baratheon was the one to lead the revolution against her father. She will tell him, your father was trying to kill my father. Your father led the rebellion, and you are the son of a traitor. And then she will decide to kill him. And you will have Gendry there pleading for his life, and the dragon is waiting for the order to burn him. But then Dany would have flashbacks of the future. If she is to go in that past, I mean, she killed Cersei, okay, we understand it. But she's going to start killing Gendry because he is the son of Robert. And then she's going to start looking for this guy and for that guy. It will be another Game of Thrones. She will start to foresee herself burning everyone to the ground. So we will still see her flying on the dragon, burning everyone, but that's her imagining what will happen if she was to set herself on that path. And at the last second, she will say Dracarys, but she will not be pointing at Gendry. She will be pointing at the throne. And then the dragon will burn the throne. And this would make sense because her character arc is completed from within, not from without. And I might just take a moment. That's the last thing I would say. After that, I'll be quiet. So the mistake, in my opinion, of season 8 is that the writers are having other characters complete her character arc for her. The writers are having Tyrion and Jon realize what's about to happen, and then they kill her. That's not how you complete a character arc. It shouldn't be completed from without, but from within. She herself should be the one to see the path that she is walking on. She herself should see what she is about to become, and she herself should put an end to it. And That reminds me of a great quote by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with a Thousand Faces. That's what he says. The hero of yesterday becomes the tyrant of tomorrow if he does not crucify himself today. And that's what Dany is about. She was the hero of yesterday. He says it in page 303. This is awesome. I actually had to take the exact quotes. She was the hero of yesterday. She was going on a journey. When she's going in an adventure, that's what the hero does. He goes on an adventure. And she is going in an adventure to reclaim the throne. But once she sits on the throne, then the adventure is over. She is no longer seeking to make something, but just to preserve the status quo. She's just trying to preserve things as they are. And then that turns her into a tyrant. And the only way for her not to do that is to crucify herself. In this way, crucifying herself is burning the throne that she struggled for all of this time. It's a very painful act for her to do. But once she does it, then she has completed her arc and she has succeeded.
Well, I'm sorry, Miguel.
No, go ahead, man.
I just realized it was kind of like Frodo throwing the ring into the volcano. You have to destroy it.
Good point.
And just as from a magical point of view, I'm not going to say. Well, anyway, sorry, Skid. I got a little distracted. When you destroy something, when you sacrifice it, you make it extremely almost you invert its existence, thus making it immortal. So they did the most powerful thing for the series they possibly could. Mm-hmm. This was a completely selfish act by destroying that. It was like the most potent thing they could have done. That's another thing.
Yeah, well said.
Amazing.
Indeed. Well said, Nate, and well said, Fady. This has been great. I truly appreciate it. It's been enlightening. And again, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot of amazing insights. Hopefully some of this energy will go to the prequel. We might be proven wrong with the Night King and other things, but at this point in projecting our stories and our ideas into the myth, it's been a great interview. And for the audience, as mentioned, we will have the show notes. Maybe, Fady, do you have a homepage you want to tell the audience or where to find your work?
Yeah, I'll send you the link to my Facebook page.
Okay. Again, on the show notes, both on YouTube, I will put his Facebook page. I will put my article. We'll put other stuff. When it's out, it'll be at the homepage and also on the show notes of every podcast channel in which Aeon Byte appears on. But I think we are getting at the end. Fady, thank you very much. I really appreciate coming on Aeon Byte Live, and giving us a very stimulating conversation on Game of Thrones.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thanks to Nate, too. Very insightful ideas about the Lord of the Rings and burning the rings. It's amazing.
Yeah, good stuff. What do you say to the God of Death? Not today. So, Nate, I'm glad it wasn't today, and you are still with us. Thanks for keeping us company as well.
Hey, thank you guys, Fady. It was great, and cheers, everyone. And when that does happen, Miguel, you know that all three of us and anyone who listens to Aeon Byte will not go gently into the good night.
No, we will burn that damn throne down in this world of the powers and principalities, one way or another. So, and lastly, of course, to you and the chat room, the audience, to all of you, I must say, Abraxas, thank you for that donation. I appreciate it. The conversations have been great in the chat room. I'm so glad for your support, for those who show up, those who listen, as we try to, again, break down that Black Iron Prison, I guess Black Iron Throne, too, and try to make a more interesting world, a more real world, and get into that reality behind reality, which is often in the lies of religion, as we are finding out. We have found out tonight on a very good conversation. Again, for members and patrons, I will put the entire interview with Fady Riad we did a couple of years ago on his, show that book, The Gospel of Lie. Excellent book. You might have tears in your eyes when you read it. You'll probably have tears in your eyes when you read when you listen to our interview, because it is heartbreaking, it is poignant, and it is powerful, and it's all about Christ and Sophia too at the end of the day. So listen to this, get his book. And again, good night, everybody. And thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self. Good night.